Yep.
Okay, good. Well, welcome everybody to Richardson Plano Networkers and our guest speaker today of Kristen Swinehart. But just before I go through her bio, a thought occurred to me, which happens, every once in a while. We look at the bios of people that David has been so fortunate as to secure to speak to us, and we look at it, we say, well, I don't do that. How can I possibly learn anything from that? I'm not going to sew pocketbooks or make shoes or whatever. Um, and I realized that as we go through our businesses, okay, there are so many skills that are hidden from us, but yet we need them in order for us to be successful at our businesses. And that's why David picks people who have diverse skills from each other. They share a lot, but they also bring new things to the table. And I think Kristen will be no exception. So let me just slide over my script. So, welcome to Richardson Plano Networking and our guest today, Kristen Swinehart. Kristen's talk today will be entitled Break Through the Turbulence of Grief. Grief can come from a variety of situations, from the loss of a job to the loss of a loved one. No matter what the grief arises from, it can leave us feeling a multitude of emotions and often stuck in our tracks without knowing how we will move forward or if we will move forward at all. In this talk, Kristen will give us tools to use during tough times to keep us flying forward. Kristen Swinehart, Kristen's warrior journey began as she tap danced her way to first runner up to Miss Ohio America. I know that occasionally people have accused me of tap dancing an answer to a question. Kristen then entered the corporate world as a wills and probate attorney. Then she began managing comedians, where she was awarded the Best Comedy Showcase from Showtime Magazine. During her personal development journey, Kristen realized she just knew things about people she had no prior of and didn't know why she had this information. Through a lot of interesting work, she discovered she is a psychic medium. I don't think we've had a psychic medium yet, which led to a unique career change and leaving her corporate career, and now holds group readings at corporations, works with families of high profile individuals who have passed, and helps private clients move through any form of grief they may be experiencing, from the loss of a job to the loss of a loved one. Her volunteer work includes serving as the board chair of Equine-Assisted Therapies of South Florida, an organization that helps disabled children and adults using equine therapy. Kristen has completed 2 full marathons, 8 half marathons, and will be completing her 9th half marathon this weekend. Congratulations to you, Kristen. Please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Kristen Swinehart.
Thank you, Randy. Well, gosh, now I can't see anyone other than myself, but I was going, and who picked such a heavy topic for a Friday? Grief, geez. Well, I can't see anybody, but I was going to ask, has anybody here, by a show of hands, experienced grief? That could be the loss of a job, a relationship that didn't work out, a loss of a loved one. And since I can't see hands, I'm just going to guess that we likely all have something in common, which I think is very rare these days. So that's how I want to start. I also do want to say that if you guys have any questions at any point, please let me know. I will stop. David, if you want to join in as well, feel free to stop me. So I just want to start out with a little bit of a story here. I know that background sounds like it's a little bit all over the place, but want to share exactly how I got to where I am today. So I remember when I was practicing law, somebody said to me, "When do I get to meet the real attorney?" And I looked at him and I said, "Sir, I am the attorney." And I'll never forget this moment because I had prepared his will from start to finish. I sat down with him, asked him all the questions, wrote the document, had him revise it. And then that was the day he executed the will and we said goodbye. And that was his last parting words to me. When do I get to meet the real attorney? that was just one of many instances like that where I was practicing law and it was like I didn't really even matter with what I was doing. And almost every day I wondered, does it get better than this? Does it get better than paper pushing galore, upset clients, and people that never thank you? Did I really sign up for this life sentence after 3 years of on top of undergrad and a whole bunch of student loan debt? I would ask myself this day in and day out as I practice law. And finally, at my wise age self of 27 years old, I decided that I wanted to quit and try something different. And that's when I went off to manage comedians in New York City. So while I was managing comedians in New York City, I also went on a deep self exploration. I just couldn't believe from practicing law that this was all that there was, that I went to work that I hated. I came home only to prepare for going back to work the next day and then wait for Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday, and then dread Sunday, really, to go back to work. So through my personal development journey, fast forward 10 years that I spent those next 10 years after I was 27 years old, from reading self-help books, taking courses, doing yoga, meditation, anything I could hear of, I was trying. And quite frankly, I was at the point where if somebody told me, eat dirt, spin around on the ground and lay down and you'll have a magical, experience, I probably would have tried it. I just felt like there was no hope. I didn't know what the point of all of this was. And not only through just personal development, but even in my career. So I had left practicing law, I had managed comedians. Then I went on to do things from selling high-end fitness franchises to working with startups, and even working for a respectable legal research company. And through all of those jobs, I never could find fulfillment. At some point, I'm questioning what the heck is wrong with me. Well, about 4 years ago, there was finally a turning point, and also 6 months ago, there was another turning point. So what were those moments? Well, 4 years ago, while participating in one of my crazy personal development journeys where I was actually working with a Peruvian shaman, I had a realization when I was there that all of a sudden I was like, I just know more about people than I think I should know. And keep in mind, I'm the person that people will sit next to on an airplane, start sharing their entire life story, and then say to me, I feel like I've known you forever. And how did you know that was exactly what I needed to hear today? And I would be shocked every time I heard this, but I kind of got used to being like, okay, I get that answer a lot. I don't know. Maybe I'm just smart. Well, come to find out, that was part of how I actually receive information. So I'm claircognizant, which is that I just have a clear knowing. So sometimes I receive information with a clear knowing. And that's how oftentimes, up until I actually realized I had this ability, I would just give people the information that they needed to know. So when I was mentioning this to this Peruvian shaman, I said, do you think that there's a chance I'm a medium? And so keep in mind, a medium, if you're not familiar, as I was not familiar with what this was until I realized I was this, um, is a psychic medium. A psychic knows information about a person who's living, their past, present, future information. And a medium can connect with people who are no longer in the living. So not all psychics are mediums, but all mediums are psychics. Maybe you'll get that in a trivia question one day. So I specialize in communicating with people who are no longer in the living and bring information through to their loved ones. So as I'm asking this Peruvian shaman, do you think that I'm a medium? And his answer was, mm-hmm. Well, that was exciting. And then I said, well, I think I'm afraid of it because in my mind, what I thought was going to happen, what I would see dead people walking around or like being bombarded with information that I didn't want to know. So I said, you think I'm afraid of it? And he goes, mm-hmm. So with that information from him, I left that experience and then went and started studying to see if there was any type of how I could learn how to develop these skills. Lucky for me, I found a woman who had been very high up in the military, a very left brain logical thinker who now was a medium. And I thought, oh, well, this is perfect. I need a logical left brainer to explain this very bizarre thing to me. So I took her course and then I actually started practicing. And by practicing, I mean calling up every friend saying, hey, would it be okay if we can see if I can talk to your past grandmother? And people agreed. And as I went through, I was seeing that I was actually getting real evidence for these people that they could identify that I would have no prior knowledge of. Even with my legal research skills, I would never be able to find this information. So I had been doing this on the side over the last 4 years. COVID, actually, I learned how to do all of these readings, on Zoom or over the phone. But most recently, 6 months ago, I decided that I wanted to leave my corporate job and pursue working as a medium full time because of how much I saw that it was helping people and the great satisfaction. Finally, here was that nugget of the satisfaction within my profession and career I had been looking for. Who knew it was going to be communicating with dead people? So I now not only help people through grief, but certainly also high achievers who want to reach a specific goal. So, the same way that I can receive information to process with past loved ones, I also receive intuitive information to help somebody. That can be things from like how to market their business better, which shockingly, sometimes the answers are like, hey, that relationship that you don't have resolved with your father, work on that. Then the marketing piece will come. So sometimes it doesn't look, no, I shouldn't say sometimes, most of the time it's not linear. And the thing that you think is the problem is not really the problem. So I help people through that as well. But today I'm going to be talking about the steps that I help clients through grief. And keep in mind, again, this can be, I think grief comes in a lot of forms. I mean, gosh, COVID obviously inspired a lot of it, but whether that's a loss of a job or a relationship, and really grief oftentimes is the what we think is going to happen that never happens, right? So if we have, like, for example, the job that we think that we're going to get promoted to and rise up the ranks, and then, but that never happens. It's the loss of that dream more so that's happening rather than the actual events. So today I'm going to take you through the 5 steps that I take my longer term clients through and how you can apply this to any area of grief that you may be going through first. So, number one, it seems basic, but I will tell you that this seems where a lot of people really miss out is number one, acknowledge it and allow yourself to grieve. So, just by acknowledging that there's grief. So, I remember when I was standing in the cemetery and I was listening to a trumpet playing taps and watching the American flag getting folded up off of the casket when I was 18 and I had just graduated from high school. And I stood there in disbelief, believing that this could not be happening right now. And I actually remember feeling nothing. The moment that was happening was the realization that my father was no longer alive. And I never really fully acknowledged. I remember being in that moment, but I don't remember feeling it. To actually feel nothing was very bizarre to me. So now I look back and realize that not only when my father passed, that I didn't allow myself to grieve. I didn't know what grieving was. And I don't know about you, but nobody's taught me about grieving. I've not read books on it or had a class in college, none of the sorts. So I had to figure it out on my own. And as an 18-year-old, I mean, there's a lot going on outside of losing your father. So I went off to, I should actually say the same day that my father passed, I was the same night of my senior dance recital. And I went and danced that night because I knew he wanted me to do that. However, that's the way I kind of move forward through my grief, was always doing the things and never stopping to experience the pain, because who wants to, right? So I didn't. So that was me not acknowledging it and not allowing myself to grieve. So after he passed, I ended up going to college a few months later. And again, I just threw myself straight into school and activities. And as it later turned out, I ended up realizing that I had an eating disorder, which was emotional eating and exercising like a maniac. But this was all to not grieve and to deal with my emotions in another way. And so, as you can imagine, that was not the best way to handle grief, but certainly gave me some insight on the impact that it can. And I was just using that as a distraction from having to feel that pain of losing my father. And again, not having the proper support at 18. And I think a lot of people could look at different grief times and see, like, we don't have the right support or the tools to help us through that. So, of course, obviously moving away to college was a big thing to deal with. That's a little bit of a grief moment too, from like a transition, like leaving a life I once knew to going to a new one, and now not having my father alone and experiencing that. So the teaching moment here, the point that, to really acknowledge is, first, acknowledge the grief, acknowledge that it's happening. And that could be even a job, like realizing like, okay, I lost that job. Let me be present with that moment, and then processing it. I also remember when I got laid off from they were doing a bunch of layoffs and I just lost my job. They just told us, and somebody calls me and I was like, oh my God, I just lost my job. And their response was, how are you going to pay your rent? I was like, oh, well, like, so don't even let me be in the moment. And I'm like, okay, that's not exactly what I was expecting to hear. So acknowledging it, and don't sweep it under the rug. Ultimately, at some point, it's going to rear its ugly head if not acknowledged. And I remember when that happened to me about 7 years after my father passed. I had this big moment where I broke down and I was like, what is this? This is grief from my dad's passing. And I was like, but I dealt with this so long ago. That was not true. I never dealt with it. So just be mindful that if you don't deal with it in the present moment, it could rear its head. And I'm also not saying like, Once you acknowledge it, it's forever gone. That's not the case either. But at least starting with the acknowledgement. So, and it's also easy, like in a relationship or a job too, right? Like to be like, oh, well, that's over. Let me move on to the next thing. Let me start searching for the next job or moving forward in that way. And acting as if it never happened will not get rid of it either. And so, actually, the second piece of that is allowing yourself to feel the grief. So, whether that's a major ugly cry or not wanting to interact with people on certain days, all of that's okay. Like, let yourself feel what you need to feel, because the more that you feel those emotions early on, the sooner you'll be able to process it and move forward. So, step number one, acknowledge it and uh, feel the grief. So, step number two is to tangibly express your feelings. So, this could look like journaling. If you lost a job and you're angry or whatever, or thoughts around it, that could look like a journal. If it's like losing a loved one, it could be keeping photos up or something that's significant to them, or maybe donating to a cause that was meaningful to them. So, the way that I implemented this with my father was because of competing for Miss Ohio, I volunteered with the American Heart and American Stroke Association. My father had heart problems, and so I saw that they had a Train to End Stroke program, which was completing a full marathon and then raising $5,000. This was when I was 21. Keep in mind, I hated running. The only way you were ever going to see me running was if I was being chased. Otherwise, forget it. But it's funny what we will do sometimes when we are going through something through grief. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to sign up for this marathon. I'm going to do the program. I'm going to raise the $5,000 and I'm going to complete this full marathon in honor of my dad. And that's what I did. I spent the next 16 weeks training for this marathon, fundraising, and accomplishing something I didn't even know I could do. And now here I am. This literally is 20 years later. I completed my second full marathon this past April. And as mentioned, that's why I'm going to San Antonio this weekend, is that I'm running a half marathon there. And had it not been for the loss of my dad, I would not be running. And 20 years later, every time I'm doing a marathon or half marathon out there or running even at all, I often have a moment where I can feel very connected to my father. And that's one way that I still keep his memory and presence still alive, is through running. So by picking up, maybe it's not saying you have to go run a marathon or, something that's really out there, although it could give you an opportunity to try something you've always wanted to do. For example, I was working with a client the other day, and since his daughter passed, he recently purchased a guitar and started taking guitar lessons. So if there's something that you've thought of that makes you think of somebody, or that, ties into a memory, that's one way to process the grief, is to just tangibly express those. Also, when I work with clients, I help them find ways to stay connected. So, one of the things with my mediumship and being able to connect is I can often connect with those spirits and figure out what are some of the signs that they're showing their loved one that they're still here. They may not physically be here, but energetically, and different things. So, for example, my father's birthday was September 11th. So anytime I see the clock at 9/11, it's actually very meaningful to me, because I can feel his presence around. So are there things or symbols that remind you of your loved ones that you could see and acknowledge to know that they're still around you? And then my kind of last point on this is the tangibly expressing the feelings is, for me, I like to help people find the gold in the grief. And obviously, one of these examples for me is that now here I am able to call myself a runner because of finding that through processing my grief. So truly, that was the gold in the grief, is that now I can connect with my father, even when I'm running, and also that it's given me something that I really enjoy doing, and something I also never thought I could do. Every time I cross the finish line, I'm pretty much in tears because I can't believe that this is something that I'm able to do. So really encouraging you to find that gold in the grief. Maybe if it's a job loss, it's like, you know what? Yeah, it was a bummer, but I also at that job met, this person that was really great. Or had I not lost that job, I wouldn't have been able to see that there was a better opportunity for me. So finding those gold that's in the grief. So the question I would leave you with on this point is, how can you express your grief? Would it be through journaling? Would it be to donate to an organization? Would it be to like meditate and clear your mind? Or would it be to actually find a hobby or something else that you could pick up that would help you move through that grief and also acknowledge what's been maybe lost, but also still very much present? So, step number three is physical health. And I have obviously done research on this topic, and I was actually very happy to see this physical health one because it's something that I think we often forget about, especially when grief. It's like, I get it. Sometimes you don't want to get up off the couch, or, um, the bag of chips looks way better than the celery sticks, or whatever the case may be. But I realize now, once I realized that this was actually one step of how to move through grief, is that truly my picking up running was something that absolutely helped me. And that also helped me process the grief. And I'll never forget at mile 10, when I was training for the marathon, well, I was coming up on completing mile 9 and I had mile 10 to go. My car was sitting right where I had, like, at the end of mile 9, and mile 10 was to run right around this pond that was so close to my car. And I remembered in that moment that my dad could hardly walk at the end of his life. And to just get up out of bed and walk down the hallway was a big deal. And so in that moment, I had that visualization of how hard it was for him to just walk, and how could I, physically capable of completing mile 10, not do it and go to my car. So that mile 10, I ran around that pond and processed a lot of grief through that, but also got to acknowledge that I was able to do something that he wasn't, and how proud he would have been that I pushed myself to continue to do that. So that's one aspect of physical health. So whether that's walking, running, paying attention to your sleep, also implementing healthy foods, and totally, there will be ups and downs of when, you don't feel like going to do the thing, and then there'll be other moments where, like, taking a walk could really help you move forward. Another little nugget here of gold in the grief was that, because of experiencing the eating disorder in college, I actually went on to become a health coach. And at the time, I had no idea why. I just wanted to learn how to deal with my struggle from emotional eating and then, crazy super exercising. So whether it's partnering with a health coach or getting some additional support while you're learning how to implement some of these, physical aspects of it, can also be super supportive as well. So, is there a physical activity that you could get involved with? Are there improvements in your diet that you could make? Is there a way to improve your sleep? To really keep in mind how important physical health is for you, as well as this. And sometimes it seems simple, but it often is surprising how it can be one of the first things that we kind of let slide. So step number 4 is judgment. So this is, being aware that you may receive judgment from other people, but how to move through that, and also not to judge yourself. I have a friend who recently lost her brother, and I remember being with her, and she said, "Man, sometimes I just feel like I am like a schizophrenic." She said, "One minute I'll feel fine, and then the next minute I'm crying, and then another time I'm angry." And she said, "But what I'm realizing is that grief shows up in so many different forms." And so she said, "I feel like I should be over it already," or like people will say, "Well, aren't you over it already?" So to also be aware that, grief does not have a timeline. And I know there's steps and stages people think we work through, but keep in mind, those don't come in any one direction. They can come and go at different times. So to be kind to yourself and not judge yourself for maybe feeling like you're not over it yet, or how could I still be upset about this? Even for myself, I remember, just like, I don't know, maybe a month ago, I walked by my dad's photo and just started crying 20 plus years later. So it can still show up. So to keep that in mind, that it's definitely not linear. And no, nobody else is having your experience. So if they say, "Aren't you over it?" And, they may not have the right words for you, understand that that's their judgment. It's kind of like when somebody called and said, "Hey, how are you going to pay your rent?" That's their judgment and their fear. That's not mine. So to just remember that those are other people's judgments, be kind to yourself and give yourself grace to move forward. It is not a linear process. And then finally, step number 5 is that support, that to get support, and it can be outside of friends and family as well, because they are also, if they're, know the same person on some level, it's good because you can commiserate. And at the same time, it might be better to talk with somebody else. And also, you're going to have different perspective on your grief versus their grief. So as I mentioned, when my dad died, I did not have adequate support. I actually didn't even think about finding support or know how to even process it. Sometimes we can't even think about what we could possibly need. So, is reaching out and finding somebody else that can support you and has a background in order to help you through that, and is non-judgmental and comes from a perspective of truly wanting to help make sure that you can move through it and recover through that. So, whether that's working with somebody like myself or some other modalities, I have a good friend who's a hypnotist and helps take people through grief. I know other people who use what's called tapping as tapping techniques. Obviously, there's traditional therapy. So, there's a lot of modalities that can be super supportive for you as you're moving through grief. So, I'm going to stop right there right now and see if anybody has any questions on these steps that I have just gone through.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. I wanted you to get through the 5 steps before we opened it up, just because I know this group is very engaged, and I know in particular a number of people will have questions about this. In particular, I'm looking at Randy because I know his. By the way, I've put the gallery view back up, or I've shown everybody that's muted or unmuted. But so I'm going to invite everybody here to go ahead, and if you have a question, observation, any of that. And I know Zip and Jeff and Todd, I know you guys haven't had the opportunity to introduce. We'll come back to that. But while the questions are fresh in people's minds, or the observations, we've all had our share of grief. Many of you don't even know this about me, but when I was in ministry, I got challenged, if you will, with doing grief counseling, and did a program we called Grief Share, and learned some of the things to do and not do, but not in the way that Kristen's been sharing. But fundamentally, the components are there. It's just how what you call the modality. So anyway, any questions, Mike, and you'll be able to ask your question. Randy, go ahead. You're not unmuted yet, Randy. Okay, there you go. Nope, your lips are moving, but I can't see it. There you go.
How's that?
More
better.
Got it.
That was my bad.
Better.
So anyhow, the one point that you brought up was, they were all extremely beneficial and important, but the issue about judgment from others on ourselves, steps and stress, and I thought the key phrase was, there's no fixed timeline. It's not linear, and I think we're taught in this world, everybody's got a chart, that shows, a bell curve or a mountain, and right here is where you find the gold. And then after that, it's all downhill. You don't have to worry about that anymore. When it comes to grief, I agree with you. There is no timeline. But there are steps and things that we can do. And you've mentioned several already today, that we can do to help deal with it. I mean, I think that's the issue. Is it's not forget it. It's not say, oh, this will go away. It's not, oh, well, everybody feels grief. It's just find a way. It's good for you in a sense, because it allows your brain to think through this. Remember your dad. Remember, whoever it was that passed away, the job you lost, or whatever, and just think through it and move on. So I enjoyed everything you've said so far today. Thank you.
Oh, great. Yeah. I think that the more as I've been diving into grief, and whether it's a Facebook group or, different things on grief, people want to know, like, when is it going to be over? Or like their spouse doesn't understand why they're not over it yet. Or,
right.
And I think that then puts the pressure on whomever is grieving to feel like there's something wrong with them,
right.
because
right.
they haven't gotten through it. Yeah. Good.
As we say, it's a journey. So who else has got something? Look, I'm looking around the Zoom here, and I know you guys are have some thoughts from your just looking at what you do and knowing what you do. I know, Ricky, you're going to a funeral, or have a good friend that has a funeral this week. And again, this is not just about dealing with that kind of loss. But anyway, go ahead, Ricky.
Well, I think grief counseling is a great thing, because everybody handles grief differently, and some people handle it maybe better than others, and then some people, and if you just like if you just went and Googled, how to handle grief, there might be steps of grief listed out or something, but everybody handles those steps in different ways. And some people stay in that grief longer than other people. And but I think that just to say that it's everything can be handled step by step by step exactly the same with everybody never works.
I would agree. I mean, because everybody has different pieces of it, and some people, and I'm kind of a little off point here, but I was talking to my friend who's the hypnotist, and he said, a lot of people end up staying in support groups for a long time because they actually feel like they get addicted to that commiserating with one another versus being able to move on, which I thought was such an interesting point. So that's why I feel like it is important to work with somebody or, stay connected to somebody who is going to try to work to help move you through it, not get rid of it, move you through it. So you don't stay and then start associating your identity with this, oh, but now I'm getting attention because people are feeling bad for me.
Mm-hmm. Don, you had opened your mic. Do you have anything to expand on that?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for being so clear with the steps. I've been going through a lot of that grief with my mother's passing last year, and a couple weeks ago it was the 1 year anniversary, so the holidays are kind of tough, and I find myself to keep revisiting that. And as for dealing with other people, it's just really important to to watch that body language, to see what kind of projections I'm sending out onto people, and to be aware of how much they're placing on me. It helps very much with my emotional communication and my understanding of what people are saying or not saying. Well, thank you. You made the steps really clear.
Oh, good. Yeah, good. I hope there's some nuggets to take away from there. And that's another thing too, when you're dealing with other people, understanding that they might, just the same way that we're not taught how to grieve, we're not really taught how to understand how somebody's grieving, right? How to act. So I was reading, and this is on LinkedIn, like a woman who had lost her child. And she said when she returned to work, somebody said to her, "Oh, long time no see." And that just obviously, as you can imagine, was like probably one of the worst things that they could have said to her. But in understanding how that could impact someone, and also understanding like they may feel just as uncomfortable talking to you as you are feeling about it as well. So I also feel like, the judgment on both sides is like also being understanding that they might not really know how to handle it as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Michael, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I'm actually a victim of a therapist that was not really good. So while all the therapy in the world is great, I would say they're on the side of caution. This was a quote unquote Christian therapist and did not advise me correctly. But I also would love to add respect where the person is. That therapist did a lot of damage, and I had to go through a 12-step program. And part of that 12-step program is the fact of a acknowledgement of a higher power, whatever higher power you think it is, the spiritual aspect of a person. And sometimes that in itself is therapeutic. And so now, after all of that struggle and all that journey, as Dave would say, now when I lose my aunt, like I did this year and things like that, I have those tools to grieve the correct way, the healthy way, rather than let it destroy me or keep me isolated, keep me fearful, keep me all those things that we talk about. So I would just share whatever your mindset needs to be re-engaged or reset. I would encourage you to do so especially in a grieving process.
Yeah, that's great. And sorry to hear that went not good, right? Like that's the worst thing, is that you're actually looking for support and then having it turn out to be like, now you need more support.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? I mean, let's see. Just go ahead and open your mic. Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if I covered this already when I first spoke, but is there a generic process or step by step, although it's not the answer. It's not follow step one, then to step, but is there a sort of a generic, what's the general rule for helping me get through my grief?
That's a great question. I actually don't know if there's a generic step by step. I mean, obviously they have those stages listed out of like, disbelief and anger, like those types of steps, but I don't know if there's actually any. I'll have to go look it up. If there's like real science or real evidence behind like this is the process you should follow. I have not seen anything like that, but not to say it's not out there. And again, maybe it's because there is not really a real process that's the same for everyone.
Yeah, I guess I'm not looking for a one size fits all,
Yeah.
but some generic, let's call them blocks that say, if you're in this block, here are some thoughts, some suggestions, some helps to move to this block, so, and you can maybe skip a few on the way, but I don't know, it's just thinking out loud.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I'll have to actually think about incorporating some of those things to think through like what could help people generically. Yeah.
What else? This is great, guys. This is, by the way, Kristen, this is kind of our normal thing in the quote mastermind form is you're giving us something to focus on, and then everybody comes at it from their angle, and we kind of expand our thinking around that. So everybody's that's asked questions or made observations is helping with that. Any other questions or thoughts, or anybody that has an angle on grief? I know our mind tends to go to the loss of a loved one or the loss of this, but I know in my own case, some of the most ultimately beneficial times in my life or junctures have been very grief filled at the moment. And then whether it was loss of a job, having to move, changing roles, changing a perception of somebody, whatever it might be. In retrospect, those were key inflection points that enabled me to then be ready for the next part, because you got to get past focusing on what door just closed. I mean, it's a very permanent thing, right? Unless you can connect with the dead, like Kristen, it's pretty much, you figure, okay, this is not going to change until, if you're a Christian like I am, you can, I'm going to get to heaven, then I'll, revisit that thing, but it feels like a huge gap, right? So anybody along those lines or whatever, as you're thinking about expanding your thinking around grief, because Kristen did hit on more than just loss of people in your life or whatever. It was more than that. Just open your mic if you have something that you might observe or think about.
Well, I can
Yeah,
certainly.
so my story about the therapist that steered me wrong was my first marriage. And so he advised me incorrectly in the marriage therapy situation, and then advised me going forward, not a healthy way to deal with loss or grief. And so that's why I'm so adamant about know who your therapist is and that kind of thing, and the 12-step program. But I should say grief can occur, like I think Kristen did a great job of saying, grief is not just whenever you lose a loved one due to death. Right. It can be like a transition that you're not expecting, that is out of left field, that you have no knowledge that's going to happen. COVID is a good one. And so there were a lot of people that were experiencing grief and isolation in COVID and attributing it to other things rather than what it needed to be attributed to, spiritually or mentally, and overcoming their own thoughts in relation to how they were coping with the disease. So I would say that even that kind of pandemic, to a degree, I think a lot of people are still struggling with grief aspects of that due to the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's right, Michael. That's a good observation. Frankly, it really is. I think it goes back to what Kristen was saying. Even in her own journey, she hadn't dealt with the grief of her loss of her father, and it we tend to, what I call, medicate the grief, come up with things to replace it or mask it, if you will, whether it's an eating disorder, whether it's an obsession with even grief sharing groups. We have a member in our network who has a quote widowers group, right? And very much, I can guarantee, I'm not saying that person, but there's reasons that are there that may be the lack of dealing or the need to keep that going, because it's really, they're medicating it, not dealing with it in the way that Kristen is talking about, right? So there's other, job groups and stuff like that are loss of a job or transition groups, and we have people that are into that thing. So what else? Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, for those of you who may not be aware, I have been diagnosed with early stage Alzheimer's, and so I'm dealing with that. I'm dealing with it. People like David have given me a lot of recommendations. I spend a lot more time reading than I did. I write. I'm trying to keep my mind active. Who knows how long I will stay at this stage, or if I will ever lose my mind, so to speak. But for me, who's been a very active executive my whole career, this is grieving for me. I'm just trying not to let it take me over and fester and worry about it all day long. And that's why I appreciate participating with David in this group, is helping others. So anyway, that's my confession.
Well, Randy, that's awesome. And frankly, acknowledgement, recognizing it, working through it actually will serve your journey forward, from my experience, regardless of the root of it, right, is taking action. That's what I say in the grief process. You actually don't start at acceptance or recognition. You start at denial and then anger, those steps that people go through in the grieving process. And so it takes work to acknowledge the fact that you either haven't dealt with or are dealing with it. Because if you just cast it aside, as Kristen was talking about earlier, right, you're basically denying it. You're just not maybe doing it overtly, but you have to go through that process. My dad passed in 98, and this time of year and things, things happen, will trigger, man, my dad would either really like this or he would not. And I realized that there's things that I'm still doing to make him proud, or to acknowledge him, that, I hope he is, but, we all go through that. So anyway, that's my little confession as well. Any other thoughts? This is really, really powerful. This is good.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I appreciate you guys sharing your stories. Sometimes when people bring up a topic like this, everybody wants to avoid it, right? But it's nice when you guys have, it'd be silly to think that everybody doesn't have some sort of grief experience, right? So to share about that and part of the process, I also think that it's helpful for other people to learn how other people are working through it, whether that's because at some point you may face a grief thing and say, oh, I remember when so-and-so shared and that's how they handled it. Or, oh, that's interesting, that's how he's handling it. Maybe that's how other people handle grief too, to have that frame of reference to work from. So I thank you guys for sharing, personal stories.
Anybody else? Karen, did you have something?
Oh, what I was thinking is, like, since I also do life insurance, it's really hard to get people to open up. They don't want to know there's going to be like a finite number of days, and they don't want to face it. And they don't realize it without, the insurance is just an avenue to protect their family. Like, and they just avoid it. It's like a financial thing, and they're like, no, don't, so because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to know they're going to die, and they don't want to deal with the counseling, maybe because they've heard of people like Michael who the first counselor didn't really help. And it's, so why bother?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, Karen, because people don't want to talk about it at that stage. However, it's such a helpful tool for people, especially for their families if they leave them behind. And I felt the same when I was doing the wills and probate work, was that everybody was always fighting over money at the end when this person's passed. And now we've got this whole mess of a situation because it hadn't been talked about, or, people were unclear. And that was one reason why I was like, I got to get out of here because there's not a happy person around, And so it's also understanding. And maybe if there were more conversations around it prior, it would be easier for people to understand, like, this is an important tool to implement to help my family if I'm not here.
Yeah. And they don't get it. They don't want to think about it. They're like, oh, well, they can deal with it when I'm gone. Well, we're trying to avoid them having to deal with it and make it a smoother transition.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Thank you, Karen. That is a good angle on the beach ball, so to speak, in terms of looking at it. We all see different things, so that's awesome. Any other, before we, I'm going to force some of you guys who haven't either introduced yourself. I know you've all, some of you joined at different times and so on. Some as often are in transit. But Michael, you'd opened your mic again. You got something.
Well, I wanted to piggyback off of what Karen said. I talked about losing my aunt last year, but I also lost one of my cousins, and he was actually only in his 30s, and so he left behind a wife, 3 kids, and at that point you think you're indestructible. And so our family is continuing to do things that are charity events in order to help the woman that now is a single mom, and has a job basically as a bus aide at an ISD. And so you don't know how, and he was the major breadwinner. And so it's one of those things where, like Karen said, you don't think of the possibility that you won't be here tomorrow and how that impacts the rest of your family. And so, yeah, I definitely would piggyback off of what Karen said.
Awesome. Anybody else on topic? Kristen, is there anything, number one, thank you for guiding us in this mastermind, and we're a ways from being done. So I'm in a topic like this. Sometimes we have to process and we have to have a little bit of soak time, but is there anything else that you want to share, make sure we take away from this discussion, or make sure we don't gloss over, because you covered like 5 points, and sometimes that information can be a little heavy or a little, okay, I'm still processing honestly all 5 of your points and thinking about being networking. Randy said something at the beginning, which I think, number one, thank you, Randy, for sharing that. But before he introduced Kristen, was the fact that we can all learn things, and that whether it's in this mastermind or it's just having a one-to-one with somebody and learning how they're dealing with challenges in their life, or how they're, the things that they've achieved. It's not, and that's what building a relationship is about. But anybody else have anything, or Kristen, I'm going to give it to you for a sec. Any other things as you think about, as I know when I just did a talk and I think about, I wish I would have said this, or I wish I would have said that. I could, next time, but now you got next time. So
Okay.
anything you think of?
Well, there are kind of 2 points here in one. One is to, no matter what your process is, be kind to yourself, right? Like, remember that. Don't go into beat up or get myself, whatever, right? Be kind to yourself. And as one of my mentors always says, like, if you were your own ideal client, what would you be telling them, right? So make yourself your own ideal, like, client in that aspect of how kind you would be to them. And then also, I think it's appropriate, since this is a networking group, is like realizing that you're not alone and there is support.
Right.
Sometimes maybe not the best support, but understanding that you don't have to be alone. So those were the 2: be kind and don't go it alone.
Awesome. Yeah, those are great takeaways. And I think that that will serve the audience. I would say that that's very powerful. That's extremely helpful. And the thing is, keeping your eyes open. And, some of it is forgiveness. I mean, along with grief, right? I mean, this is my own grief experience, by the way. I wish I would have done more. I wish I would have had more time. I wish I would have told people things that I didn't tell them while they were here, or I wish I would have done this in my role in that business before it ended. I wish I would have told Randy what a great friend he is and how much I appreciated him and those kinds of things. I wish all of you guys, I would have done more of that. So there's a lot of, but you know, that's really blaming, you're grieving, you're blaming yourself,
Right.
and you need to forgive yourself, as well as I think the other part of it is we might blame the situation or the person that we think victimized us or whatever. And again, forgiveness of that is extremely important, whether it's an ex-spouse or whether it's, you know, anything, or an ex-employer or somebody in, you know, a networking group that said something unkind or, you know, insensitive or whatever, right? I mean, what do you think about that, Kristen? I mean, that's...
Yeah, I really like that. Oh, I wish I should have said this or I should have said that piece, because I often find myself like, you know, in the same thing 20 years later, right? Like, I shouldn't have said that to my dad. But if we could just, and this just came to me as you were talking, what if the way that the things worked out was exactly how it was supposed to happen anyway? So we weren't supposed to say those things, or we weren't supposed to have had that moment, right? So it all happened in the way it was supposed to happen. And now we can move forward with that. But yeah, I know that woulda, coulda, shoulda in so many different things, right? Never seems to benefit.
Yeah, no, it's a journey of faith, right? You have to kind of look at it and say, and frankly, I can't think of many things in retrospect, looking at the vantage point that I have right now, that didn't make my life better because they happened, just in a different way, not in the way that I expected, not in my plan, if you will.
Right.
So that's part of the moving on, embracing the loss, you know, acknowledging it, and then continuing to go through the doors that open, not just focus on the door that closed. Okay. So any other, let me see, I don't see, Randy, did you have something else, or go ahead?
Yeah, I just wanted to, and I'm not trying to put somebody on the spot here, but I'm going to at least ask him the question, and it's his decision if he wants to respond. Bernie, you deal in an industry where people are moving from the everyday lives that they've had, and now they're essentially transitioning into something different. Do you wish to share any examples there that may be helpful for the rest of us?
That's a good question. We grieve. We're a grieving extension of the family at large,
Okay.
and we do it awkwardly sometimes, and sometimes we relate to it, having to do with things that we've been through ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, we deal with grief in a variety of ways as an extension of the family's grief.
Okay.
So, on a personal basis, I personally have. I tend to be a stamp it under your feet and move on kind of a guy, generally speaking. I mean, that's just my nature.
Right.
But I can certainly think of things that have impacted me personally, dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was violently murdered by a neighbor at age 7, so I had to deal with that. And
my God.
Yeah, my brother came home from Vietnam and never, very much an alcoholic, and I was his caretaker for the last 4 years of his life,
Wow.
and he had early onset dementia himself, and that was a hell of a journey. And one of my kissing cousins in the past couple of years, my dear friend, my very best friend, passed away about 4 or 5 years ago. So, you know, all those things I've been able to kind of navigate, but the thing that bothers me daily I guess it's a micro grieving kind of a way, is how we are kind of messing with, or how we're dealing with what I call the second greatest gift from God, which is the uniqueness of the United States of America. I wish we took better care of it, so to speak. We're really on the edge of I don't know what to call it, but we're on the brink of doing our culture, our country, our gift a disservice. And
Agreed.
so I think about that every day, particularly as it relates to my grandkids.
Right. Thanks, Bernie.
Great. Thanks, Bernie. Jeff Klein, I'm going to, since I can actually see you on the screen, and I'm going to give Todd and Zip a heads up. I can see that Todd's not in front of the computer, and I don't know where Zip is, even though, you know, because he's often on the road or whatever. But I want to give you guys a minute to both introduce yourself. I know, Jeff, you should know Kristen, but anyway, introduce yourself, or, you know, just share any thoughts you have on this from the point you joined in, or any questions. Just need to unmute.
He needs to wake up.
No, Jeff is there.
I'm just kidding him.
Jeff? Oh, wait a minute. We muted. Okay, sorry.
For the unmute button.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay, we got you.
Am I on? Am I on? Hello,
Yes,
hello.
you're on. We can hear you.
Okay. I help people with the words they want to say, so that people who are listening actually respond. That can be anywhere from helping them with their 30-second elevator pitch, all the way to a keynote address to thousands. And we work with speakers. We work with professionals like Kristen and some of the other folks here to help them become speakers, to use speaking to promote their business. And we have an international destination website where 400 plus meeting planners a month come to find speakers for their events. And that's called speakercoop.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.
Quick question, Kristen, do you have a book or anything that's in process, perhaps?
I don't have a book, but I was going to tell you a little bit later how I do work.
Okay,
with people.
I'll wait. I'll be patient.
Yeah, but but trust me, as I was putting some of this together,
Yes.
I was like, oh, I see where the book
Okay.
comes from. Yep.
All right.
Yes,
Grandpa knows baseball. He's back.
Okay, Grandpa knows baseball. You want to tell Kristen a little bit about yourself, and then or ask any questions or make any observations? I'm giving you the floor.
Okay. I wrote the book, Grandpa Knows Baseball. Is the website, grandpaknowsbaseball.com. I wrote the book, Baseball Trivia Only Grandpa Knows. It's a short, quick read. It's deliberately so because I think books are too thick. No one wants to read them. This is something that's a lot of fun to read. It's got a lot of humor. It's got a lot of history. I think it's great to be a great stocking stuffer if somebody wants to give it for as a gift, or if somebody's in business and they want to give it to a client. I think this would be a great gift for them also. As far as the talk, I've personally probably been through more deaths than anybody else here, and so there's a lot of things that upset me overhearing this stuff. But what I can be is I can be a resource of anybody who wants to talk about this. Bernie, I'm sorry about your mother. We can talk about that. I had a son who was murdered, so I can relate to just about anybody here if you want to, and I'll be happy to do it, and go from there.
Awesome,
Well,
Todd.
by the way, I also sell life insurance, and one of the reasons I sell life insurance is because I understand what death does to the family. That it's there's no amount of life insurance you can have on anybody that makes up for it, but you need time to grieve. And like when my wife died, I had 2 young kids, so I never did have time to grieve. And so I understand it from that standpoint too.
Thanks for sharing, Todd. That's awesome. I mean, I know a lot of your story, so
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing a little bit of it. And Todd is somebody who can relate. I think we can all relate in different ways, but most important thing is to listen and understand everybody's on their own journey, not judge, not say, well, this is how I dealt with it, and this is what you should do. That's not necessarily the way to approach it, which I think was one of Kristen's points.
Yeah, I don't know what happened with Michael, with your therapist. I don't know what your therapist said, but a lot of these people, they just see it from one standpoint. They don't see the whole picture. So if you want to talk about it, I'd be happy to talk about that with you also.
Awesome. Okay. Let's, Kristen, I'd like to turn it back to you. Number one, let's give Kristen a hand, a virtual hand here. And Kristen, thank you again. It's very provocative and also inspiring, and I appreciate you sharing with it. What can we do for you, or how do we stay connected with you? What kind of resources would you like us to share?
Okay. So first of all, of course, I forgot to drop in my notes sheet from the beginning. So there's a little notes you could have taken notes on. But anyway, it has my contact information at the bottom of it. Also, I'm just going to share in here a link too on how I work with people. And I can, I guess I can share my screen. I have a special offer. Let me see if I can do the screen share from, even though we talked about it.
Yeah, you should be able to.
Yeah, let's see. Okay. Oh, window, hold on. No. Okay, got it. Can you guys see this ways to work with me?
Yep.
Okay, so, and also if anybody wants to, I'm going to give away this, what I call the group only. So if you guys are interested, if you want to put in for a drawing your name and email address, what this group is, and I know it sounds like, mediumship might be a little odd, but this group is, you can even come and just watch and see what happens. So I get together a group, and I call it Greetings from Spirit. So if people receive little messages from their loved ones, it's also, I think, if you've never experienced what a psychic or medium does, it can be an interesting way to just learn and have that experience. So for all of these, I've offered a promo code, since you guys are all here live, with a different number if you want the discount on them. So that's the group reading for 147. And that's also what I'll be giving away. That's a 90-minute session with a group of other people. I also offer one-on-one private readings. Again, this can be connecting to a past loved ones, or it can also be used for business intuition, or if you need some intuitive guidance. I do these sessions. Again, this is a discounted price for the group here. And then in the middle, I have my 3 one-on-one private sessions and a group. So, the one-on-one by itself can kind of get you going on your goals. I like this 3 group session because it can really help move you forward through, whether it's going through grief or a goal. And then I've included that group session as well, because you can really learn a lot from other people's experiences as well, which I think is evidenced here. If I had to have, thought of what would happen in this group, these stories that I've heard here are not what I would have expected, right? But we can also really learn a lot from group experiences. And then at the bottom, you can click that link. It will take you directly to my booking page. And then again, you can use these codes. They'll be valid until Monday. Let me see if I can stop sharing.
Yeah, just the same button that you shared. You can just click that. It's a toggle. Also, just so you know, I did share that link that you had on the slide as a hot link in the thing. I know I'm kind of interested or fascinated. You're the first person that I've run into that actually uses Book Like a Boss.
Oh, when I saw yours, I was like, wait a minute, same thing. I've never seen anybody else.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I've been on that platform since they started. So it's always amazing.
I'd like to just give a quick testimonial, because I've been coaching Kristen and just in the process, I ran into a roadblock with somebody, and I was just talking about it, and I wound up asking her advice, and intuitive advice made a big difference for me. So I just thought I'd throw that out there as
There you go.
a little testimonial to how she
Good.
helps folks.
Excellent. Excellent.
Can
Yeah,
you
thanks,
guys hear
Ron.
me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I just had to unplug this headset. It's my computer sometimes gets a little wonky.
Wonky.
Wonky. That's our zombie
password.
apocalypse term going through, because Zoom was often wonky in the beginning. So anyway, well, I appreciate everybody being here. Kristen, again, thank you. Thank you. And if you would do me a favor, if you could, to the email that we originally communicated on, if you would share any links when this will be recorded, it'll be up on our YouTube channel, be on the Be Connected platform. It'll be other places. So I'll make sure that we share those links in the show notes of those. Okay.
Okay, great.
All right.